Forgot which button I am. We are Sage Against the Machine, the most niche podcast in the podcast verse, probably. I'm Joshua.
I'm Isaac.
We have a guest today. We're inviting back once again
Philip White-Cree.
All right.
Our first repeat guest.
Yeah. Well, he knows the most.
Yes, he does. I would have to say Philip. Yeah, Philip and PJ. They know a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Good start, guys.
That's all I was saying.
We were just talking for like 45 fucking minutes.
Yeah, we started late. Yeah, because I was kind of thinking like we could, because Philip's our first repeat guest.
Is it the third time?
Mm-hmm.
You were on Outlaws.
Oh, you were on Outlaws.
Oh, yeah.
That's
on
right.
Sage, yeah.
That's different.
Yeah, that's different.
We're the smart ones.
We're the ones, we don't make fart and dick jokes. Oh, yeah, we do.
Not usually.
Not usually, but once in a while. Anyway, but yeah, so I was, I just wanted to ask, like, what was the impetus for, what did we do, or what did you see that kind of spurred you to want to come on again?
Well, I think like when you're saying you're the nichiest podcast, I'm like one of the nichiest kind of historians. Like, it's our community.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's nuances, and where I always tell the outside like how it is in Onkwehonwe with an asterisk. It's complicated. They go, "You're not kidding." and so like you do need a lot of resources to be able to understand what is there, what the layers. And I do get slightly irritated when I hear of people on the outside of like, "Oh, I know this one person from Onkwehonwe. Is everything like that?" I was like, no, no, that's one. It's Onkwehonwe. 9 out of 10 of us will agree the moon is made of rock, but one person will say it's cheese just to spite everyone else. So,
or it's flat.
Yeah, exactly. So like you have many facets of the community, and they all have different opinions and different ideas and sometimes different facts. And so that's like one of the things, like I'm like anybody who's trying to be that guide or liaison into this community, there's a lot you need to unpack. And I think like that's where we had resources, and certain resources are no longer around, which I'm very sad about, because now how do you maintain that kind of idea of like independence from different influences?
Mm-hmm.
How do you have conversation, which I feel like something that the Dudas always refer to as like, oh yeah, the kitchen table, we always have conversations and people visit, and like we're kind of almost too busy to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Particularly people with families and children, because they're like, okay, well, I got to take so-and-so to lacrosse. I got to so-and-so to soccer. I got to take so-and-so to figure skating. And I'm like, we're giving our families like opportunities, but at the same time, does that mean we are losing something in the process?
So we have to stop taking so much care of our children, helicoptering them, and just let them go like the old days.
Oh, yes.
Is Josh saying fuck them kids?
Oh, the days where the aunts and uncles would all be in a room, and all the younger children would be sent away.
Yeah,
well, that's I was thinking about that because I'm 43, and I remember. I mean, this. I think most of us grew up in the 80s and 90s. I remember those times, like every morning. You know what I mean? Adults would go visit and have coffee and be fucking filled with a carton's worth of cigarette smoke in the air. You know what I mean? But people don't really do that much anymore.
And I think, there was a rumor mill back then, but at least back then you actually had a person physically tell you to your face.
Right.
And there was kind of like this really strong impetus of like, I'm telling you as much as I know. And then if you were lucky in the 80s, some people had their scanners and being able to listen.
Oh, yeah, the scanners.
And then in the 90s, they get a little bit more encrypted. So most people started losing out as to like, what's the actual details?
Right.
And then you had the old phone calls, like you call the landline. Somebody in the house is going to pick up. Somebody's going to talk to you about what's happening, and like you have those longer conversations, and you have to have the long extension cord to move to wherever it is more comfortable for you, and have those talks and conversation. Lo and behold, when things got wireless, and now everybody is carrying the wireless around, and it's ringing, and like, where is it? Where is it? And I think at the same time, we have a wonderful computer in our pocket to make us accessible to things.
Constantly, all day long.
Yes.
The knowledge is all here.
Yeah. And
sort of.
Well, the factual stuff is there.
And it is.
How do you sort through what's the factual stuff, though, right?
Yeah, and I was just having conversations with people in my field. Like I say the field of history. I try not to say I'm a true historian yet. I haven't really published or really haven't presented stuff in that capacity. I'm getting there.
All right.
But like historians have to filter. Like that's pretty much the professional job. Is you got to take all the information out there and really start filtering down and being critical as to, okay, what are the pieces of information that are out there that I need to bring together, analyze, review, and then present a narrative based off of that. And, you have good historians out there who will write down exactly where they got the information, cite their sources, how they got about it, and be critical from their sources. And then others who are a little bit more lax in their job, and they're saying, oh, well, I heard it from so-and-so, and this is what happened. I'm like,
gotta cite your sources, bud.
certain filters are better than others.
Where's those footnotes?
Yeah, and that's what I always looked forward to, are those footnotes, those citations. And even then, you still got to go back to, okay, are they citing a secondary source or a primary source?
Right.
And then if they're looking at either one, well, what was the audience? What was the intention from there? And then this constant analyzing of who is the author, what is their message, who was their intended audience, what was the concept they were supposed to receive. And for our, Indigenous history of North America, anything before 1992 is very suspect.
Sure.
Because before the pushback on a certain 500th anniversary of somebody sailing the ocean blue,
Hey, he discovered a lot of stuff.
You don't
Fucking Italians.
Genoa.
Yeah, get it right.
Genoese.
He didn't even speak Italian.
Whatever.
It wasn't quite united at the time.
Yeah, I know Italy was. I was making.
Yeah,
a
they're
point.
bad people.
You
We
didn't
know.
have to fucking. What'd you have to cut me down for, Philip?
No, I was politely correcting
Yeah,
you from the
I know I wasn't so
misinformation
specific.
and the overgeneralization. Well, then that's where historians need to, there's that critical thinking that they have to do
I wasn't really offended. I was fucking around.
and present it in a way that is like, okay, here is the basis.
Right.
And here is the understanding at that time. And good historians will phrase it and say, like, from the perspective now, this is how we interpret it.
Mm-hmm.
So that in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 60 years, 100 years in the future, revisit it. Look at all my same work.
Right.
That's how science evolves. Is like, you know how the experiment was done. You attempt to redo it again to ensure that all the variables are there. In history, luckily, we get more data as time progresses, hopefully.
Right.
And more ways to analyze it. So, like right now, the field of history has had the scrolls, charred scrolls from Pompeii, which as soon as you try to unroll will fall apart.
Right.
So now we have this scanning technology to actually see the ink on the charcoal.
That's
And
so
we have
cool.
the AI that's able to flatten the curve ink and be able to start translating exactly what is written
Wow.
on a charcoal piece of papyrus.
That's pretty
amazing.
cool.
Yeah.
And that's very recent, within the last 2 years.
I was gonna say that's got to be real new.
I can't wait till the AI rules us all.
So, I was just listening to another sources around history, and they cautioned around it.
Yeah.
AI is good at telling a story because it looks at examples, large language models, and it spits up. It takes the input and spits out something output. It can't look at an item and start analyzing its time, what it has gone through, and putting together that narrative. So,
Who wrote it?
yeah,
What the audience was,
She
yeah.
basically pointed out, like, historian will never be replaced by AI.
No, I couldn't see that.
Because you need a smart filter.
Yeah.
You need a person to be able to take that. And I feel like in the community, we're not the greatest at remembering things. And I think that's why we've kind of fallen into certain cycles and certain overgeneralizations. And I try to avoid commenting on social media unless it's like a blatantly informational fact that could help.
Yeah.
That's wise.
conversation. Yeah.
That is wise.
Usually I do. Some of us are.
Why
little-
you
Some of us comment a little more.
listened to the last episode?
I listened to the last episode, and I also saw
It's still out
All
there.
the interaction?
Yeah, the interaction, at least part of the interaction. So, yeah, and it's one of those things of like, in the vacuum of having reliable publishing sources, we have to rely on user content, user created content, and now it's like, well, how do you validate? How do you ensure? And what do you do when it's so easy to mass produce? Does it have the same weight
Right.
behind it? At one aspect, you want things that are highly accessible, but you also want things to be critically correct and like really grounded as to what what's the intended audience.
Sure.
And as the author, does it have does it have the intention? And I feel like that's why some historians, especially historians that do like political work, like they're always being a job because there's always going to be something new in politics, and there's new ways to look at it. And looking at a policy that could be considered a failure now, 20 years down the road, be like, oh, that saved us because it did the hard thing then.
Because it took time to.
It takes time to kind of, especially in like anything within education, it takes a lot of time because K through 12, that's a long time to have an educational shift and have that actually show up. And so, I'm in higher education. We're still having the ripple effects from COVID because
and you're gonna
and the incoming students who
that's gonna happen for a while still.
Oh, the ninth graders are wild. Last year's eighth graders were wild.
Really?
And it has something. Yeah, it's because they were the cohort that were at a particular age. I mean,
they
that's
were little and they were
and there's certain behavioral kind of like checkpoints of saying like, oh, at around this time it's expected that you've learned these social cues,
right,
these social expectations or understandings, and if it wasn't presented there, then there's going to be a deficit, and sometimes it can pick back up, sometimes it's going to be a little bit longer, and others will not be. And we every generation has different expectations, and like that's where, from my experience of being educators, like you need to understand you got this material that you need to teach everybody, but at the same time, how are you ensuring that every individual is able to have an opportunity to succeed? But as I was also told, is you also got to give people the opportunity to fail. You can't take that away from them because that is a learning experience. So you can't spoon feed it.
Yep.
You got to present it, and just like any parent who's trying to determine what kind of food to give their youngin through as they get older, like what can they handle, what are they probably going to choke on, and what are things that they will not be able to handle. And you don't do chopsticks right away. Yeah. But it's kind of that educational building, and I feel like education systems have that. It's kind of innate, and I feel like if you go back to our traditional teachings, like in the creation story, one of the very first aspects of the creation story is what happened in the sky world before Sky Woman fell.
Yes.
It's much less documented. And it talks about that realm. It talks about how the uncle died, and that was like the first big conflict. How do we deal with the death? But even before that, you have this downfending of placing two children in what is referred to as a longhouse to protect them, keep them away from everything. They didn't know anything. They grew up, and as youngins do, and when they get to a certain age, they start looking at each other, and they had relations, and afterwards, it's kind of found out, oh, that was actually, they were related. That should not have happened, and it's kind of that reminding to the audience. You can't overprotect a child to the point that they do not know how to manage and control themselves, in particular with other people. And here are the dangers. So it's an early warning against being overprotective. Early warning about
no helicopter parenting in the sky world. Not a good idea.
You need to be very aware of that. And then, Sky Woman as a young person has the aspects of her and her brother having family, and then the uncle passing and what it meant to her, and the aspects of what the nephew's expected to do with the body. And so you have all this idea of like, one of the first things is like raising children and taking care of the deceased. And so we have that really ingrained in the very beginning, and it's an aspect of the story that we don't talk about much. And I feel like we always focus on the fall,
Yep.
but what about beforehand?
Right.
And dream guessing.
That's a good, yeah.
And what
That's a good
about,
point.
the expectations? There's a hierarchy there, which is kind of interesting because you have a hierarchy in the sky world, but yet from Kayanagoa, we don't have a hierarchy. We're very opposed to it. So it's like comes into questions. Okay, so in the creation story, we know there was some form of hierarchy. There's this idea of you're getting your lineage from your mother, and what does that mean when she transitions from the Sky Woman transitions from Sky World to here?
Mm-hmm.
But she also meets animals, and then if you're a little 2-year-old, you ask, where did they come from?
Yep.
Right.
And I've had these conversations before, and particularly with people who start, going through the creation story, and they're kind of going workshopping through the aspects. And I've had this conversation with others, and I've been, kind of these thought experiments with friends and family and cousins, and especially when you're hearing these when you're a little kid, you can ask these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I raised was, and one of the interpretations I've heard, I always refer to them as interpretations because English is a really bad language to understand the creation story, is those animals were formerly spirits from the sky world. And so I asked, if you die on Earth, we understand that that spirit goes back to the sky world, does that mean the first death in the sky world becomes the first spirit to come down?
Mm.
And there's aspects that indicate that, the uncle who was the first death, his symbol is lightning, and he would have came down from the sky world to Earth. And as far as science says, there had to be a spark of lightning at one point to cause life on Earth.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Whoa.
We knew it all,
yeah.
man.
When I said that and connected it to, the uncle was also considered maybe the turtle that was down in the sky, in the water world as well. As soon as I said that, I had 3 matriarchal women turn their necks and just snap at me and be like, I just said that a masculine turtle was the first spirit to come from the sky
Oh
world.
dear, how dare you?
How dare I? And so
How dare you break our magic story?
And I didn't mean to, but
Did you get talked to a little bit?
no, because the presenter was like, he's kind of right. Because it was talked about that the other animals were also spirits that
Right.
transitioned. And the only, the saving grace I will say is Sky Woman would be, from our perspective, the first spirit to go from the sky world to the water world in her form.
Mm-hmm.
All the others had transformed in some capacity, and when talking to other like community traditionally minded and faith keepers, and they said, yeah, well, most of the spirits have 3 forms. They have like a humanoid form, they have an animal form, and then they have a form that represents what they are in the universe. And so whether it be a storm or whether it be a comet, like there's a phenomenon that, so like they can transpose into those 3 different aspects. So metaphorically in the language, we have a capacity to understand the changing nature of things and the changing nature of individuals. And we understand that. And it's kind of reflected even in our names, because I asked my elders and my dadas about this around the names. Because I used to have a name, very common, because my dada at the time didn't know the proper protocol to how to name her first grandchild. So she just picked a name that she knew, and she called me it. And a lot of people know me by a shortened version of it. If you knew me before I was 12, you know that. Will is the only one from the whole podcast that knows that, and then he gets a little shocked at when he says he remembers that. And so I had that name, and it was gender indefinite. So the beginning part of it does not have a clear gender. It's gender indefinite. It's neutral. And I asked my dada, because when I got my new name, Lohetio, and I talked with the clan mother, and we developed it for me, and she wanted to make it proper because somebody else had Gahetio, which was the gender indefinite version of that. So she was like, Lohetio means formally he rather than it or the presence. So she was like, okay, we'll go with that. And went to the longhouse, had it put through. And so publicly assume that, yes, I am this person who is sitting with this turtle family, who is sitting under this title, who is sitting with, who are my parents. And so it's all public record in our traditional way. And when I asked my dida about, like, what would be the difference between Kahitio and Lohitio? And she goes, well, a lot of the names are in the third, the gender indefinite. And she's like, it's because that is a spirit of such presence that is neither masculine or feminine. It just is. It's a force of nature. And a lot of our traditional Mohawk names fall under that category. They're not trying to be specific, generally. And others are, because, you need some variation.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a variant. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, it's the complete opposite of what I was taught about the language of, well, it's pronouns, he, she, and it, and you only use that as a negative, and it's this really Western understanding of what's less than human. But yet our names,
But it could be more than human.
are the opposite. It's like, more. And so I was like, so it's one of those, like, we instinctively had that, we maintained it, we never analyzed our thinking about it, but this is just something that the Didas maintained. And I felt like that was one of the ways of saying, like, hey, just because you've heard it in one way doesn't necessarily mean, especially in English, it was truly understood in that way.
Right.
We have a lot of metaphorical language. There's when I took a linguistics class, we talked about that. In English, you have 8 nouns to every verb. In Iroquoian languages, which is the linguistic term for it, is we have 8 verbs to every noun. So which means that we are describing, we're very poetically, we're very metaphorical about how we're going to describe things. And I feel like there's a flexibility there. And there's an understanding that just because I say it one way doesn't mean it's the only way. And I feel like if English is your first language, you're not necessarily taught that right away.
It's rigid.
It's rigid. It's only this because it's a noun. This is what it is. It's a chair. It's not any type of chair.
You know what? That's how they teach English too. It's like very, like, it's this,
And
this, adjective, no, and
It's almost like it's a Germanic language or something.
Well, started as that and then evolved.
You know how they are.
don't do it.
There's a lot of influences. But I will say, like, there's an adaptability with English that a lot of other languages don't necessarily have, and other languages is adopted from English because they don't have those
It completely
aspects.
changes every generation sometimes.
And I think that's okay, because if you're looking at linguistic theory, you understand that as long as I can communicate and you understand it, it don't matter. So
It works.
whether it's in language, Pig Latin, English, maybe some Mohawk, maybe some emojis, maybe some hieroglyphics. Like there's an understanding of what I'm communicating, and there's there, and that's where working in DEI and working with accessibility, you have to be open to that because not everybody can communicate in one way. And one of the things I have to be always aware of is when I have slides, even for presentations, I try my best. I'm not always perfect about having the accessibility options available, that if this was given to somebody who is not able to properly have full vision, they have capacity to be able to still read or understand or have an image description of what is.
Sure.
And it's a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
But it's that concept of, like, I'm being open.
Well, you're an educator. I mean, that's...
Yeah, you know that there's more than one way to teach.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, just looking at from our own communities, past history and our current situations, is that one does need to be open. You can't just jump to conclusions on certain things. And I think that's where we've really lost that, because on social media we're just so used to that echo chamber of, well, I say this and everyone's giving me likes or everyone's giving me thumbs up or commenting.
You think everybody
You
thinks
go,
that.
and I'm just like, that's That's good for them as an individual, but as a collective and a community,
Yeah, there's nobody standing
Not so
next to
much.
you or sitting across from you who's actually giving you feedback.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you kind of saying that you feel a little bit of kindred spirit with the show here?
Yes, because it is trying to be critical and putting it out there. And with my position, I will always try to be more diplomatic. And so I won't try to throw ashes in individuals' faces, but I will throw ashes at certain situations or scenarios that may come about.
See, he's being diplomatic, talking like about how you and I are not diplomatic.
We're pretty diplomatic when it comes to that. Like, if someone's not here to defend themselves,
Yeah.
we're not going to call them out
Sure.
personally.
Which I mean, that
Usually, I got to check that I actually do that. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I think
I think we're
we
pretty
do a
good
good
about this. Just
job
because they're
on
not
that.
here to, they're not here to, like, you know, state their piece.
And that was why, like, we talked about that after the last episode, was because it did, you know, you saw the interaction. I didn't know that you had.
Everybody did. I got a text about it today.
Did you really?
Yeah, very supportive. I think they used
okay.
the word sack and throw in the river.
Okay, well, but you know, it was something that I just felt like it bothered me, you know, like the way that I just don't think like we need to be throwing anybody out of the, you know, out of our tent, you know what I mean? And that's the way that it came across to me, and I could see why people would have felt that way. And then, you know, Josh had commented as well, so it kind of became a thing. And I thought we did a good job of not actually dragging, and I don't think we gave any kind of hint that would let people
No, you'd have
know
to
who
find
it
it.
was.
If you were not privy to the actual conversation, you'd be very hard pressed to,
Yeah.
you know, be able to point fingers to like this individual or that this group or something along those lines.
Right.
Yeah,
Between us and the
It
NSA.
was, you know, it was very much if you know, you know.
Yeah, because you've listened to, you've been on the show, like Josh and I are not afraid to talk about anything, but we do try to keep it, you know, like not to bring someone in if they're not here,
Yeah, and I think that
unless it's a public official, and then we can do whatever the fuck we want.
so I think that's one of the aspects of like why we need to have conversations like this in a fairly accessible manner, as you had mentioned, like YouTube and or whatever podcasts or SoundCloud that this is on. You're able to at least say like, hey, we have a conversation around this. It's logical, there's some understanding, there's some analysis, and you're presenting it all to the world to say, hey, what are your also thoughts on this? And I think that's one of the aspects of like having that dialogue and having that conversation. And you do start dialogues, like you invited an individual to come forward and, you know, say your piece, let's have a talk. And like, you know, the whole premise of we don't all have to agree, and that's fine. Like I'm not necessarily here to make everybody agree. I'm generally try to listen to what other people's options are, and I've done this in the past, and when there was a certain thing that happened in the community on the island, and there was a lot of brouhaha about it, and so I went over there, and I knew somebody was speaking about certain things that just seemed way off. So I was like, hey, tell me all about it. And their eyes lit up, and they're like, just everything was like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this. And they're just they're going on, and I'm
3 days later.
I'm patiently listening, and I'm making a mental note and a mental checklist. And when they got done and said, what did you think? I was like, okay, there's my opening. These are the facts I know, one by one, going through how that was either contradictory or how this was absurd or how this was not any way related to anything that was currently present. And the crowd gathered, and they were all just listening in, and they just start cracking up because like I'm very logically ripping this person's ideology to shreds.
Sure.
But I had the receipts.
Yeah.
And I was just very calm and diplomatic about it. And afterwards, I said, want to have further conversation? They walked off. And from what I was told is they didn't return for over a week.
Wow.
Because they were now being critically analyzed further position and thoughts, and
then properly informed.
and informed them to the best I could.
Yeah.
You know, what do I know? I was a
I'll say properly informed.
I was a newly minted 21-year-old talking to a person that was probably three times older than me.
Yeah.
And and that was one of the things. And other people came up to me afterwards, and they were like, "Yeah, you made some pretty good points." And it made me rethink what they were saying. And it was just like, well, I'm willing to give a tolerance to certain things, but when it starts going into such a field that it's just causing more misinformation, more chaos, and it's not coming from a trauma-informed approach. It's saying like, "Oh, I have my bullhorn. This is what you're going to be listening to." That's not helping the situation, and I feel like niche market.
Yeah.
Am I even saying that word right? I only see it written.
Yeah, and so it really kind of is like, okay, let's
Niche.
actually have niche.
I say niche, but
niche.
I think I say things wrong on purpose sometimes.
I think you do too.
There's ways to try to, in a modern concept, we adapt.
Yep.
We find what works. We seem to go with it, and if you succeed when multiple people in the community are trying to do the exact same thing, you made it. It's just a matter of can you be able to maintain that momentum and being able to have that. And I think that this is one of the ways of it's needed. There's that vacuum. There's that ability to critically, okay, how can we really talk about this thing and call out a spade when it's a spade, and be able to say, maybe we need to tap the brakes on this, or maybe we need to move more forward in another direction. Or full steam ahead on this because we're gonna miss that iceberg if we just floor it now.
Right.
And so I think that's where independent journalism, independent sources really help give that an opportunity, and really trying to have be critical and be and I think that's one of the things within the Guy Not Goa is it was really designed to be critical.
Yeah.
But it's not made to cut people down.
Right.
And there's that perfect phrasing in there is hacking the roots. Are you really just digging at their past? Are you really just trying to destabilize them rather than actually engage? And it's interesting because I always hear people talk about, okay, this thing and that thing. And it's just I've had to present our identity and our culture and our history to the outside a lot. And so I had to develop, kind of how do I very much package things together? And one of the ways that I've understood this is that we have primarily 4 canon stories. Creation story informs us how the world came to be and how the environment is. If you have a problem with nature, here's the sources. And the 4 sacred ceremonies comes from that. It's this is how you connect with it. Second one is the clan story. Some people will put the clan story and creation story together. I tried to keep it separate because it had a slightly different intention.
Yeah.
It talks about migration. It talks about family. It talks about understanding, being reconnecting to nature in a way. And the way it was presented to me, and the one that made most sense, is individuals didn't just go to the river to see an animal. The animals watched these people, these individuals, go to the water and collect the beginnings of that would be the soup for that family, so their nourishment, and saw something in them that reminded them of themselves, and then presented themselves. And that is nature seeing that connection. So if the clan story starts saying, okay, this is how you have your clan and why it comes from the mothers from creation story, but this is the animal connection and the connection of the environment. This is how you fit into the environment. You're a piece, an intricate piece that works with a lot of partners. And I feel like there's so much richness in that story of saying, pull your shit together and work with your family.
Yeah.
Is the understanding. And life is freaking hard. Things will be tragic. The other side is there to give you that hand. And it's such a strong empathetic approach that I feel like is missed by so many. The idea is, okay, well, yeah, I go take care of the funerals for the other side. No, it's you are literally there to empathize with them.
Mm-hmm.
You're having a dialogue. You're conversing. You're saying, I am sorry for the shit that is happening to you. How can I assist? And that approach, I feel like, is easily lost if you just gloss over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes from, the story is said to be like a young boy had this dream that they needed to do this. So like the whole premise was like it's come from a young individual, but it came from dream guessing. He didn't know what it was until an elder interpreted it.
Right.
So you need both the young and the older generations to be in conversation. And I feel like that gets lost very easily, and everybody's in their own little silo, in their own little world, and
Yeah.
and I love my duddas, and they love playing solitary online, and just like, can we play a card game? Like,
Tell us what they're eating.
yeah, more interactive.
Let's play spades.
So like there's I think there's potential opportunities if
Yeah.
we're truly adapting and we're truly understanding. Okay, cool. So the creation story about the environment, clan story, how do you deal with family, and then the guy in Go, the Great Law, is about how do you live and deal with other people, and how do you deal with differences of opinions.
Right.
And everyone's like, oh, well, it's not strictly a law or strictly a code. It's like, it's two parts.
Yes.
There's a narrative, a story of an individual who redeemed, if you really go by the count, 4 different people.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you maintain it is the second part of it. And that is kind of setting up the aspects of, the expectations and the understandings of keeping a good mind. What is leadership expected? What are different roles expected? And how do you ensure that, your other people are welcomed and they follow the white roots or they take shelter under branches? Like, it's all about being empathetic. It's all about that. And I feel like if you really, really drill down and really look to how the Peacemaker brought that message, he wasn't perfect. It was said that he had 2 rows of teeth and kind of had a hard time really articulating certain complex details.
I've heard did he have a stutter? Or
Some interpret it as a stutter.
Okay.
The one of the older ones, I don't know the actual words in the language, but it kind of gets interpreted as like 2 rows of teeth where his tongue couldn't quite articulate. And so like some say, well, that meant a stutter,
Right.
Or maybe it was actually physically 2 rows of teeth.
Yeah.
that happens.
Deformity.
Metaphorically, it could be.
That's the other thing.
Tongue
metaphors.
tied, speech impediment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the ability to communicate isn't 100%. Well, why is that? If the person was sent by divine forces, and how and why? And so like automatically that's like what does this person bring to the table that other people needed to hear? And I always love the debates when people say, "Oh, well, he was from Haudenosaunee." I was like, no, the stories kind of say he's from another nation, another community, and he experimented over there first to bring a peace.
That's what I was.
And then was told, you need to go fix the biggest, meanest, baddest individual in the Indian world, and that happens to be a turtle warlord. No bragging rights there. But it was basically convince him and he'll convince everybody else.
Yeah.
And and if you really, really follow the journey, he's talking to, he comes across a cannibal. And he knows he can't go directly. He had to take this bypassing and kind of like convince them to really reevaluate what they were doing. And there's kind of like that reviewing, like physically, what are you doing to your body that's making you that way? And being critical about it and having a conversation. He's empathizing. He's not viewing him as an enemy.
Right.
In any other Western story, you would probably hear like person
to
comes
kill
in
him.
ultra strong and just bashes an enemy.
Because they like to kill almost everybody.
Yeah,
Even
and
their
so,
lord.
So you have the cannibal, and then he goes, The pattern is a little bit different for whoever tells it, but it's generally like the cannibal, Jagunsase, Hayawentha, and then Tadaliogo, the warlord. And so it's like going to these 4 individuals, and even the warlord sometimes, they'll throw in a 5th, him or else Tadadaho is the more popular, famous one. And so he's really talking to these individuals who are doing things not for the group or the collective. They're doing it for individual gain.
Right.
One's trying to eat people. One is purposely being a femme fatale to cause chaos. You have another, that one is just so broken, like he's just, depression. He's practically suicidal. Like, how do you bring somebody back from that edge? Warlord, you had to, to Dalioga, you had to like convince him 3 times. Oh, you say you're so special. Prove it.
Yeah.
Turtle thinking from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And
Jump.
And it's like, how do you prove yourself to a skeptic?
Yeah.
And then finally to Daliogo, who is this big spiritual force to be reckoned with, talking to him and understanding why is he have the 7 knots in his body? Why is he so angry and full of hate? Because human monsters are not born, they're created. What has he gone through? And so like the entire story is about empathizing. It is so far more advanced than any Western notion of like counseling.
Absolutely.
And I feel like we really miss this core message of like, you go and talk, you have a conversation, you remind them that the world will keep spinning. It's shitty now, but the sun will still rise again. And it's like, and that's what Onduga Wadeko is like, you're constantly reaffirming that whatever we are about to say, remember everything else. You say your piece, you'd have your meeting, some people will be angry at the end, but you do it again at the end to remind everybody the world will still keep spinning. And I've seen several of our meetings that kind of people were just angry coming in and angry going out, and I was like, you weren't paying attention to the words.
I said at the right part.
I know,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You're agreeing, weren't you not? And so I brought the receipts. Or you're just being performative.
No way.
I know, right?
Just wear it on your sleeve.
And so like that's where the Guyana Goa really gets its strength with like, how do you make relationships outward? And it's intended to grow.
Yeah.
And the roots are supposed to go further and further and further and go on, and branches are supposed to provide shelter. And so when people say, well, we didn't do that, we didn't provide shelter to everyone, I'm like, okay, we were pragmatic, I understand that, but at the same time, the intent was to be that. And if they shot their guns at us the second time, we said no.
Yeah.
Like the French. And so we had to be pragmatic. How do we deal with certain scenarios? But what the biggest thing about it is the position of, you can bring people in if they so choose. There's a consent aspect to it. And if they don't want to be fully in, then you still provide them shelter. They're under the branches. And so I think that's such richness in our traditional teachings about how should you deal with conflicts. And one big thing there is like consensus.
Yeah.
You're supposed to reach consensus because everybody needs to be heard, and everybody needs to have a full understanding of what the next motion shall be. Like what's the next action. And I feel like we've tried to shortcut that so many times. People tried to ram in their ideas.
Yeah, because we're actually supposed to, when it's a big issue, we're supposed to counsel for a whole day, right? Like
minimum.
Yeah, to sleep, think about it.
Because there's all kinds of historical records of when legislatures want to make a deal with us, and like, okay, we'll meet at this place, and we're like, no, we want a neutral location. They're like, why? What? So our official neutral designation for a long time was Albany and Montreal. And the other protocol was, you don't send the leadership. You send representatives. You send proxies. These proxies will be wined and dined. They come back, and then you have a conversation, and they try to convince you as a whole and can kind of say yay, nay, or what I would say is it's not necessarily nay. It's like, what's the alternative?
Right.
And I feel like we have lost that. It's like, it's not about just being obstructionist. You need to have an alternative.
Yes.
And the process, and last time I mentioned, like, I demonstrate that consensus building in my classes, and I have a bunch of non-Indigenous people really understanding how do you have a three-way conversation and have everybody come to some level of agreement. And sometimes, first thing in the morning, there's no real impetus to say otherwise. They're like, sure, whatever, we go with the flow, whatever is the first option.
We're still sleepy.
In the afternoon, they're ready to fight. They're like, I will never accept that option, and I will fight you. And I was like, you don't be spiteful. We're going to be here for multiple class periods. and they sometimes learn the hard way, and sometimes the children get it, and sometimes the adults are the harder ones to understand.
Sure.
And so I think that it really goes to show, like, we thought of it. Is it always perfect? No. And it understands that, because it is, when I try to explain how the Guyana Goa is to grow, is like, if you understand some plant biology, cells start duplicating, and that's how plants grow. It's like they have one cell and it elongates, and then it separates into two and grows and grows. And in the whole process, they're always referring to cells as daughters. And the idea is, like, they are growing. Sometimes they're on the same page, and sometimes they develop into their own. And so what the message was always about is, like, regardless of what happens, if a group or a person or in part of it is not able to get along, then by all means, they can get along elsewhere. We can have a parallel system. And we've done this historically. That is the reason why we had two fires, one that got relocated to Buffalo Creek and one that relocated to Six Nations. The idea was, whatever happens, we need this to survive. You deal with the British, you deal with the Americans. Whatever happens in the long run, hopefully we make it through and we can eventually merge, or at least one will survive. And we always had this idea of,
It will always be connected, though.
yes, and that we're going to be basis. And ashes have been thrown before and saying, well,
Sure.
you're not recognized. Your horns are caught at the border.
Yeah.
It was,
You all made a deal at the Halaman track.
yeah, that's not how it was supposed to be.
All the
But
Mohawks went to Six Nations. That's the real Confederacy.
Yeah.
Others stepped out of the circle
Yeah.
for a very long time. And people get a little upset when you bring that up now. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to delete 270 years worth of our history. Just
Yeah, but don't
Just
move
look at it
back.
and like, did it happen?
Does anybody truly remember?
We buried it under the great white pine.
Yeah. And even that one, like, listening to the speakers, and when we had the recital here, I've listened to them.
At the IGA?
Yeah, and I listened to them there, and I listened to them at one of the practices before. And the wordage is actually to take the weapons of war, which is a little bit more larger metaphorical than just physical, and throwing them into the hole that is from the uprooted tree into the waters that flow under the earth. So this isn't just, okay, just put it away. No, this is literally casting them out of existence.
It's almost like flushing them.
Yes. It's
Memory hole.
it is that to get rid of it entirely. Now we're pragmatic. We also know that you still need a gun to hunt.
Sure.
Whether it's just animals, we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not as fun, but,
Oh, we always have the young bucks
The ultimate
coming
game.
through, and that's the thing. Like, historically, we always had to send emissaries to Albany and Montreal and say, okay, we're not declaring war. We have a bunch of young guys. We're trying to prove themselves. They joined a war party. They might have burned down a village or two, caused some chaos.
Might have burned a cop car on the ice bridge a few
Maybe
years
once or
ago.
twice.
Yeah, and it's like, it happens. And I think that is kind of a constant when you're dealing with the Guyana Goa. If you're always trying to be in a peaceful state, it's very hard to police strong emotions with other individuals, because you don't, you're mandated not to restrain them. Like,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that? And I think that's where like our teachings are really
Counseling, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's,
you need to have a lot more conversations first of like how to manage emotions, how do you manage situations, and say like, it's not as dire and bleak as it is, and if you spend enough doom scrolling, you'll be able to find that very easily and be angry. And I'm like, if you are going on social media and you're coming off of it angry, then you need to view that as an addiction.
Take a breath before
breath.
you hit enter.
Find cute baby animals and spend some time there.
you know what? That
Calm
does
down.
work. That really does work.
And I think that's because, why baby animals? Because you're being empathetic. You're realizing that you have more love for a baby animal than you do for another human being who just probably pissed you off. That's how you check in with yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is something that, if we're adapting, hey,
Yeah.
there's a way to, if you're aware of it. And
Well, and it's relatively new, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so that kind of educational, historical aspect of it, in terms of as we get further away from its inception, we'll learn how to deal with it better. I would hope.
we would hope. And so I think that's where, this is the perfect plug-in for the fourth story. And when I explain this, I would say like, if you look at your hand, you have your index finger as the creation story. You have your middle finger as the clan story, which, is a dominant feature that should be very much respected, and if necessary, can get a message across.
Yes.
And then the ring finger being, the Gainagoa. It's like, what are you really binding yourself to? And then the pinky is going to be the Galawio story, because if the first three teach you about how to live with the environment, how do you live with your family, how do you live with others, Gainagoa answers the question of how do you live with non-Indigenous mindsets? How do you live with a social political landscape that has shifted drastically from creation?
As we see it.
Yeah, as we see it. How do you live with that? And that was the answer. Now, not everybody fully agrees, and I say, well, not everybody needs a pinky, and you still survive.
Right.
It just helps you get a better grip on things.
Looks pretty cool when someone's missing a finger, though, I gotta say.
Like a Yakuza.
It's like, yeah, that's pretty badass.
So for the guy for the Galawio, it's again two-part. It's talking about a narrative, an additional narrative. It's also talking about like a social contract of like what's expected and how are a group going to survive the huge upheaval after the American Revolution. Huge chaotic mess.
Because they knew this was coming, right? I mean,
Yeah, it was, the writing was on the wall.
it was yeah.
And we have a lot of historical evidence of like what happened, what that transition looked like, and what was the chaos during that. And we have stories from several people, including Mary Jemison, who I absolutely love her story. But you have to understand that she didn't write it. An Episcopal preacher wrote it for her afterwards. So like, take it with a slight grain of salt, but still understand like the core concepts are there. What has happened, how to deal with certain things, and what she viewed before, during, and after the American Revolution, and what the toll was on her and her family, and how she preserved as much as she could, because she became a clan mother.
She was not a native, right?
Yeah, she was born on the ship from Ireland, but we did not perceive that as an impediment. We viewed that as an individual, and she was supposed to be sold off, but two Seneca women jumped in and said, "No, you're not going to be selling her off." She was not attacked. Her family wasn't attacked by Haudenosaunee. It was another group. I believe it was Susquehannocks. Don't quote me on that because I don't want to, take them off. But it was like it's another group
Another
from
nation,
from the Pennsylvania back territory, and they adopted her, taught her. She was 12 years old, so she already understood English, and she was raised among the Seneca, became Seneca, was adopted into the Wolf clan, eventually had a family, became a clan mother, became entrusted with a lot of aspects, including wampum belts. She was the last clan mother to hold the woman's nomination belt before it was relinquished to New York State and eventually returned back to us in 1989.
Wow.
So, yeah, So anybody who tries to say that your genetics determines whether or not you are in is full of it, because the one who actually saved the wampum for that position was that.
Okay, I want you to keep going, but I gotta have you. I gotta hear your thoughts on this. So where do people get this super rigid idea that you can't be a clan mother or loyane if you were adopted, and you're in your technical DNA genealogy, physical was not Onkwehonwe?
That is racist mindset that came in probably closer to the 20th century.
So our people can be racist.
It's race science and eugenics, right?
Yeah, it's coming from that idea of purity of blood.
And so our people can be racist. They've been influenced by Western idealism of
thinking
race
and logic, because you got to view that it's a logic that people heard, and they're like, oh, well, that validates my feelings, so therefore I'm going to go with this logic. And no, looking at the historical record of our past is like,
so 300 years ago, our people would have been like, what are you doing?
If you were really basing this off of genetics,
Yeah,
I will say the genetic line practically is non-existent or very far removed in the 1630s to 1660s. During that time, we were dealing with the French and we were dealing with the English, I believe. They were in the picture. And we were trading with both of them. Smallpox and a couple other wonderful diseases came in through that 30-year period and completely wiped out so many people of the Confederacy. One estimate is that it brought us down to the entire Confederacy was less than 1,000 people.
holy shit.
That was about anywhere from 90 to 95% of the population was gone. So how do you recover from that? The guy in Agoa says it. Adopt. We went and found all the survivors in all our neighboring areas and brought them in and said, hey, you're a survivor of this apocalyptic event. We are too. We want to unify.
And when you mean survivors, you mean other Onkwehonwe nations or white people, anybody around?
Anybody through those the areas, because it was said that we had parties that went all the way east to Massachusetts, south to the Carolinas, west to the Mississippi. Some claimed that when we crossed the Mississippi, we got beat up and we said we were going to stay on this side of the Mississippi, and around the Great Lakes. And so we went and found all these survivors and brought them in. Some say that we got a little bit overzealous and kind of robbed any village with people and took as many as we could with them. And so, there's some
accounts of that.
Algonquin-speaking communities up north in the Great Lakes region that say, yeah, we stayed for 40 years on an island so you guys wouldn't come out of the woods and kidnap us.
Holy shit.
Let's go kidnap some of them.
So like they have the stories of like the boogeyman.
Yeah.
And we become part of that. And it gets saved in memory that way, but in the 1630s, 1660s, you have this really strong period. And even anthropologically, and the archaeologists will always say, well, okay, well, that's the Morning Wars. That's when the clan mothers sent people to go replace.
Yeah, yep.
And so that period happened. And so if you're looking at genetically, we have a huge mix at that time, and we viewed people that once you're adopted in, you're in. Like we didn't see, like, if a person is part of your family, you don't just kick them out.
Right.
They are family. And I feel like that was the core intention from the creation, from the clan story to Guyanagoa, is that you need to have that door open. And we did that. And so that's why in Onkwehonwe, part of our family tree was from up here.
Oh, yeah.
And the other part is from Mohawk Valley.
Yeah.
So one aspect, yes, our ancestors are buried here. Not necessarily a Kanyaka ancestor,
right.
but our ancestors are buried here.
Yeah.
And so that's where that comes into effect. And it also starts affecting those groups that had connections with the Jesuits. So
Sure.
St. Godeli's story is that same period. And so some decided that, maybe they didn't want to stay in the canoe. They wanted to go into another canoe that was going to be following the Jesuits. And so they did. And so that's part of our community's history and part of our sister community's history. And I'm not trying to bash you. I'm just saying, like,
Right.
we were trying to survive after a post-apocalyptic world.
That's what I kind of, like Josh and I will talk about this sometimes too. And it's not, for us, me at least, I don't want to speak for Josh, but the whole point is to have these discussions. It's not me saying, I'm discounting your loyalty to identifying as Mohawk or, anything like that. It's just like, this is a part of us. This is the reality of it, and like, let's just understand it. And we don't need to cut each other off as, to be so exclusionary
or less than.
Yeah.
And I feel like that right there is like, I'm coming from a community that's already marginalized.
Sure.
I'm part of an identity that's even more marginalized.
Sure.
Part of that, the LGBTQ community, and which is hilarious because anybody in the world can be part of the community. So it's like this really like weird inverse of like, it could be anybody and could be nobody. And it's just like, and what does that mean? And the family understanding keeps growing with like more avenues of identity.
Yep.
And so like somebody has said before, I'm a super minority. It's like minority of a minority of a minority. And also I'm from this district. I'm a super majority. And so it's just like this.
The minorityist.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the only one.
And so talk about that niche. And so,
there you go.
So that's how, I have to understand it.
We have the nichiest guest on the nichiest podcast.
Yes.
So I guess this is nichiest.
Fuck yeah.
We're going to transcend time and space.
Yeah.
It's all going down.
And so, or going so small that it's outside of time and space.
Mm-hmm.
So
we are the quantum realm.
Oh boy,
exactly.
Here we go.
I saw that movie. It was terrible.
It was.
Yeah, but I like listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about the multiverse and stuff. It's fun.
Hey, I'm always open to it.
Yeah, me too.
It puts a smile on my face knowing that, okay, I just went through a shitty experience, but in another universe, I had the best experience.
Yeah, right?
Yes,
That's my idea for a TV show where you have a TV that can watch all the other dimensions of what's going on in there. But then you get addicted to it because the other is better.
Morty.
Rick and Morty probably did it. But...
Yeah, interdimensional television.
Oh, yeah.
Where you just watch it.
I thought of that before Rick and Morty.
Yeah, they did do that, didn't they?
That's cool. I'm as smart as Dan Harmon.
They had
Dan Harmon's a genius. Too bad, what's his name there? Justin is reportedly a creep.
So is Neil Gaiman.
Yes, I just saw that.
Oh, man,
news.
he sent me that story. Did you read it?
That's why you always need to be careful of your heroes.
Yeah.
That's why I like Frank Herbert. That's the whole point of Dune.
Yep.
Jeez.
And so with for Galileo, it kind of tries to answer that question, like, how do you live with non-Indigenous people? And you got to also remember it from like a historical lens of like, okay, at that time frame, what did we need to do to survive that secondary post-apocalyptic event, which is the American Revolution? And it worked for some. Our community was a little bit more insulated. We had the river. The river was always our source of food and protection and shelter. And so it didn't resonate the same way for communities out in the western part of the Confederacy who were so far displaced from their location, from their environment, from their food stocks and supplies. And so I think, you need to understand that aspect. And then when the person who's bringing this message is murdered, the fear that develops from that of, okay, well, now we can't trust each other. There's an us versus them mentality.
Right.
It becomes a very militaristic approach. And even the one who brought the message, his own brother was one of his biggest critics. And I have to, I always preface that as like, yes, the message was brought forward. The person who bore the message, his brother also called him out on it, was critical. Now, they didn't happily resolve it. And it laid the foundation for a philosophical split. It's either you're with us or against us on this avenue. And I feel like there's some good points. you don't always have to subscribe to everything. And because we have multiple medicine societies that are active in the community, not everybody subscribes to the exact letter of the interpretation of that message. And why we still consider a woman, even if she has children or not, or doesn't reach the preferred number of 12 children. At the time, it was necessary. Now, not as much. And
Although if it did, it would solve a lot of our problems.
yes,
going
I know.
forward.
I knew you were going to go there with your
Yeah.
population solution.
That's
for a
worked
lot
for
of
the
issues.
French.
And so I think that's where, like, whether or not person subscribes to it or not is like, it's not mutually exclusive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like we need to have that really crystal clear, is that these are not mutually exclusive aspects.
That's where I kept getting at with the dogmatism. I think it comes from Catholicism myself. But
Well, it's that adoption of, like, this very strong rhetoric of you are or you are not. And I feel like you totally missed the point from the creation story, where things can be multiple things at the same time. It doesn't have to be rigid.
Yeah.
And when I hear people say, well, I am always this name and that is it, and I'm like, I feel you haven't committed any crimes because you feel like you don't need an alias or an alternative name
Or a nickname.
yeah.
Tumble.
Yeah, I had a nickname for a lot of years.
Yeah.
You had another name for a lot of years. It's not that weird.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, there's, people have different ways they want to interface with different things. And when that question was brought up in Ganasesne, the answer was, well, according to the two-row, if you want to do business on the other side, then you do business with their names. Keep our names out of it. It's just like, and I'm like,
You're just doing business, right?
yeah, it's like, okay, I get that. I can't. There's no way for me to break that logic. So I'm like,
Right.
okay.
Well,
And-
actually, why would that makes perfect sense, actually.
There's the alternative thinking. There's like, who is anybody else to define who our identity is? We'll use our right names because those are our names, and we don't need English names. We can cast away that because it's a different time now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also but then you'll get the people who will say, well, my Mohawk name, that's the only one, and if you use an English name, you're an asshole. Like, we shouldn't be doing that.
Well, and I'm coming from the LGBT community. You can define yourself as you so choose.
Right?
I also know that there are consequences to if you were choosing certain paths. Some paths are going to be difficult. Some paths are going to be easier. What have you. I'd rather give a person multiple options, allow them to go through. I was given that, and I have my English names, and I have my traditional name. And with my English names, I can't just dismiss it because it is connecting to my family. Like,
Sure.
it's connected. If you put all my names together, all four of them, they all reference all four of my great-grandparents' pairs. And so I can't discount that.
Right.
But also the Mohawk name is like, I did have a previous one. It wasn't properly, followed the process. I made sure it did follow the process and got validated for that through our official processes. And it did make me feel kind of that whole aspect of like, hey, okay, and now I know where I'm sitting. I know who I sit with, who I talk with, and what is my family on a larger sense. And, well, anybody turtle from Onkwehonwe knows there's very few of us.
Yep.
But as I'm told,
It's almost like you just walk slow and do everything else slow.
well, I'm told there's a lot of us in Six Nations. So I'm like,
I've heard.
Yeah, that's right.
how did we convince that many out there?
Well, that was, you listened to the last episode, so I kind of went into a little bit of how, and I think I talked to you about that, how I got mine. And, so that's just it's a great example of how, the different ways that we end up doing things here. You know what I mean? And our processes allow for that, and I think that's quite brilliant, and I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, and it shows that adaptability that was all the way back in the creation story, and has always been historically there. And then all of a sudden, now today, we're having heart palpitations when it's not following a very strict regimen.
Yeah. I mean, I had thoughts about that because you use the word trauma informed, and I suspect that part of it goes back to trauma. That when you're traumatized, it makes you feel small as a child. So now you try to elevate yourself to the detriment of others rather than lifting everybody up. It's all crabs in a bucket. We like to use as a metaphor.
That's
frogs in the boiling water.
The oldest metaphor for Aquasasne really is that crabs in the bucket aspect.
Yeah, so I suspect that has something to do with it because it will elevate ourselves. However, even if it's amongst this tiny minority, we want to make it smaller.
Well, I also feel like, so growing up with cousins, as everyone does in some capacity, is like you get teased, whether it be cousins, family, or even friends. And I feel like there's an aspect of teasing that people will say, oh, well, man up. I'm like, no, really. Our understanding of it from a traditional sense is teasing is there to say, well, do it or don't. It's trying to give a person kind of that push to like, either you're going to go with this, cool for you. If not, then sit back down. And I feel like when you take it to the extreme end, you're trying to break the individual. And then when I was involved with a particular function that was happening in the community and involved something that just didn't sit right with me, and I raised it, and I was being critical, and the individual took major offense, and I discussed it with my dudas, and they basically said, that's not helping, that is breaking a child, that is hurting them purposefully. And I was just like, I saw it, but I didn't know how to articulate it until my dad said it. And I was just like, that is really true. And that was what really grounded me to say, like, no, this is not right process. And had disagreements. Yeah. And didn't really show back up through it, but I lend my support the way I could to the individuals that I was committed to assist. And afterwards had discussions about, do you really want to go through this? This is where it's going beyond that framing and that programming. And so one did, one didn't. So that's the scenario. But it really kind of made me reevaluate that, yes, I am capable to feel when something is off. I am capable to go to my resources and inquire. And I am privileged enough to be able to say and voice it in a way that might upset some individuals, might not, but at least I raised it. Yeah. And I feel that that's where critical discussions, and no matter how niche you are, you need to have those abilities and you need to develop that. And within that realm of teasing, it's like, oh yeah, I'll tease family members, but I'm not there to hurt them. Yeah. I'm there to say, okay, well, prove it then. Like, give them that push of encouragement to say either, sit down or, showcase what you got. Yeah. Or from the Rick and Morty, show me what you got. And so I think that's what, all of our teachings are really grounded in that thinking. And that I mentioned the 4 fingers on the hand, but I didn't mention the 5th, and that's the thumb. And for all of us, we say that's probably the most dominant finger on any one hand and has the most pull or push. I interpret it as that's our history. The first joint is like our past pre-contact. The other joint afterwards is contact of current. It probably has the most impact for a lot of things. Sure. And, we'd be lost without it. And for some people, it's not as clear. And I am privileged enough to be aware of what I know and what I don't know. And that's where I can have that critical conversation and say, hey, altogether, I have a full hand that allows me to do a lot. And I will try not to be ableist and say that, one hand is enough. Right. Yeah. But
hey, some people ain't got no hands.
I know, but we have tools and assistants to us help them. So there are ways.
They ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dan.
I was wondering if you're going to go somewhere along those lines. Well, luckily, I work with students who are working on prosthetics.
Yeah, I'm a child of the 90s. I'm programmed by television.
Yeah. It's kind of hard not.
Heavily influenced by the 80s, too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's
I'm a child of the 80s. I'm the latchkey
an 80s and
generation.
90s kid.
I don't need anybody for anything.
Yeah. We really were the ones that, like, I keep seeing those memes pop up of our parents didn't know how far we rode our bikes. I was like, they really fucking
They
didn't.
didn't.
They had
didn't.
no clue. They had no clue.
So I think that's like to kind of like bring that all together is like why we need to have that grounding. Like, yes, our traditional teachings tell us this. They're trying to inform us if we come to a situation, this is all the best practices.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're going to come to a situation where there is no answer, and that's where it's okay. Do your best.
Yeah.
Right.
Because as the good memes about our language say, speak the language no matter how bad it is, because your ancestors are still going to smile.
Yeah.
Not laugh at you, but they're still smiling. So it's like you need to be humble enough to accept when it might not be enough or might not be effective at that moment. But I've been in positions where I've had to call out things critically, and it kind of had that moment of like, and I will just sit back down and allow it, process it, and then afterwards people come up to me after like, thank you. I needed to hear someone say that. And it just kind of, one thing I've heard is that to get that mob mentality, if you only need 25% of a group to be active, and it would assume that everyone is.
Yeah.
So it only needs 25% plus one to push it in the opposite direction.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to get a lot of those people to actually speak up, though.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
that's where, like,
And I haven't figured it out, Josh. We haven't figured it out
I mean,
how to
currently,
push them. You know?
currently, I just try to be nice.
Or encourage. I mean,
And
yeah, and that's really, if you go back to our traditional teachings, it's like,
listen more than I talk and be critical. I've learned.
yeah, and don't get me wrong. We probably have a same idea to solve certain solutions,
Some solutions.
in the world
Yeah.
that could be solved very easily in certain ways. But again, is that the short-term gain for a long-time loss,
Right.
or is it going to be really looking at the long term?
Yeah.
And a few different avenues I was been working with, and like one of them that kind of really struck me for like just how do you deal with like a racism issue. There's only one person that can ever change a racist individual's mind.
them.
Them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is no way other than to prove them in their thought and thinking as being not valid. You have to show them an alternative.
Right.
And I feel like, if you go through the most Zen way and the most great Lao way and then the most Buddhist way is just like peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Scott
Mostly.
really is.
Mostly. Depends.
Yeah, but
You
it's
also have radical monks, so like
Yeah. And some of those monks could kick
give
your,
and take.
Yeah.
well,
yeah.
that's the thing, though, too, is that when we, I agree, I mean, from, the way I've been taught is, the peace is the ultimate goal. I do know that there are times when there must be forcefulness. There has to be at some times.
I feel like that might be the shorter answer to some scenarios.
I'm not saying all.
But I've been to Grand Council several times.
Yeah.
I've dragged a few people to it. And they always gave me the same answer. How do you survive listening to that? I go, it's the most exciting thing. I don't know what they're saying, but I just like watching what's happening.
Yeah.
And then, ultimately it clicked. It was like, our process is quite literally to wear people down
Yeah.
until they just agree. Because the alternative is more discussion.
Yep.
So, that or is lunch.
Yeah.
In which case, they will break immediately, go to lunch,
Yep.
solve all their issues, come back in 5 minutes, they're done. And so I think that really goes to show. Is like,
Full. Want to take a nap?
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I had a few thoughts. One was on Grand River. Handsome Lake himself never made it up there. So I mean, I was just talking with some people at the Longhouse recently,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not really known here. And then what you said about the river protecting them, they have a river as well. So there's kind of a parallel in what you were just saying, that they have the Grand River, we have the Better River. Ours is bigger.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go with that.
Ours is grander.
Factually, ours is wider and bigger.
Ours is the grandest in the world. Well, there's the Amazon. That's better, but
The Nile
yeah, there's that one too, and the Mississippi. But nobody can
and the
spell that.
Colorado,
The Yangtze,
It's
Yeah,
a good one.
Yangtze.
Shut up, guys.
the Ganges.
the Ganges.
Just like your river. It's better than the Rio Grande.
There's the Mississippi.
Yeah.
There's the Indus Valley.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool one.
I don't think is the Rio Grande as big. No,
No,
it's
it's
not
small.
bigger.
It's really small. It's like
not really small.
no, it is.
I'm
It's
just
small.
saying
It's smaller than the Salmon River.
bullshit.
No, for real.
Really?
Yeah, it is. It's like
Huh.
it's like a stream.
Depends where and what time of season.
It's a
Yeah,
brook.
exactly.
It's a brook.
I show videos of our river to my friends in the desert, and they are amazed.
Yeah.
Location.
Right?
Is if the history says anything, it's our ancestors are like, okay, nope, this is good.
Yeah.
We're good here.
That's. I mean, you see that for like most civilizations, they'll pick the spot with the best water. I mean, that's
Yes and no. So
And then they'll
kind
poop
of
in
the
it.
smart way to do it.
So it solves one of the the base issues, physical security.
Well, I mean, also travel.
Yeah, and then it leads to like the secondary aspects of like how do you maintain yourself and how do you make relations with others and all that aspects of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but is also ripped off from like Plain's teachings. So again, like how do you take care of the physical needs first, then dealing with all the upper.
See, in college, all they teach you is the Maslow's. That's
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
all they. That really
Maslow's
is. That's
hierarchy.
all they teach you. They don't teach you that it came from
It was
any other influence. They don't
Yeah.
teach you that.
Yeah.
check your sources.
Yeah.
And so yeah, just wrapping up from that is like, yes, there are ways and knowledge and understanding that we have and we still retain in a huge amount of detail. We just need to get back to it,
Yeah.
discuss it, have debates. I love having discussions with other people, and I love, as I mentioned before, love having conversations as to parts of our creation story that start talking about sex and like
Oh, those are my favorite parts.
and so like so different things that might have been censored, but is
Yeah.
some form is in there in some capacity in other aspects. So I think that's kind of like how we adapt, we understand, we encode, and hopefully we have people that can then filter that and then present it and be able to have that discussion and conversations.
It's kind of a big job for us to do then.
Wouldn't you love that Time Machine TV and hear how they told the creation story 600 years ago?
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I want to know what's been altered, what we've borrowed.
I'm assuming
it's
all
mushed.
the fart jokes.
Yeah, there must be tons of them. Farts are funny in every language.
Yeah, they are.
Corned beans and squash, if anything, leads to
Well,
Holy-
the word
yeah,
for squash
that-
is the
yeah.
same word as a poop.
Yep. Again, metaphorically, multiple things can
Yep.
mean different things, and so like we understood that, and that, when my doodle was telling me about some words that sounds innocent, but when you actually say it contextually can mean a lot of naughtiness. And so again, like that's like it's encoded there.
I
It's
mean,
like we play off of double entendres. We have fun with it, and I think that's where you don't have to put it on that reverent pedestal. Like these stories and teachings were meant to be discussed.
Yeah.
Meant to be critically analyzed. I'd love to have a discussion with somebody, say, alternative to my idea of the uncle as a turtle and lightning bolt is the first being to come to the water world.
That's because you know what? I've been thinking about this though, and you're the perfect person to kind of bring it to. I can't. I don't know why, but lately I keep thinking about all of the things that we don't know that we don't know. I mean, like you're here, and I kept thinking about that, and I'm like, I want to hear what Philip, where he would go with that.
And so like the very basic of that instantly reminds me of you'll have generally two types of people who don't know what they don't know,
Right.
and will just lovingly be in the desert walking into a cactus because they're in awe of the picturesque landscape. And then there are those who know what they don't know, are constantly looking down at their feet when they're walking in the desert for fear of stepping on something that's probably going to cause either ouchies or painful death.
Yeah.
And then stopping and then looking up. And so I think that's where like traditional teachings are like, how do you deal with that environment? Our environment luckily doesn't have that many issues, but in other environments, their teachings are really strong and about this is what you do, this is what you don't do.
Yeah.
If you do this, you're going to disappear or die. And
Yeah.
I feel like, if you wanted to compare religions or beliefs, a lot of it is about answering 3 simple questions. How do you live with that environment? How do you live with other people? And how do you live with yourself?
Which is the fingers that you just pointed out.
And
What do you think that we have? I mean, like, I don't know. I think about that, though, is like from all of the people that we've lost, since contact, the different plagues that you mentioned earlier when we were out there, how much knowledge do you think we've, I mean, I don't even know how to comprehend all of the knowledge that we've lost. We don't even know was there. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy to me.
yeah, and I'll go with like the African proverb. They're really butchering the interpretation of it, which is like anytime a person dies, a library burns. And it is that amount of information. But our teachings around 7 generations is that you are learning from those 3 previous generations. You have a right to know, and then you have the responsibility to transmit it to your peers and the 3 generations that you would have contact with.
You're the only other person, I know one guy who, he was the only one who ever talked about the 7 generations in that way, that we're looking back from 3,
And
we're the middle, and then we're supposed to be acting and looking at the future 3.
Because that one's the interpretation that makes the most sense to me. And I've
Me
heard
too.
it from very particular people in the Confederacy, and I've heard a lot of other people in the Confederacy say the opposite, which is or the more linear view,
Yeah.
like 7 from this point forward.
Yeah.
And I say, well, why not 8?
Right.
Why not 9? Why
Right.
not 12? Like, why
Because
we,
7's a magic number.
Well, we have 3 sisters.
3 is
Yeah.
also a magic
4
number.
winds.
3 makes, I mean, when that guy explained it, and he was younger too, he was like around my age, well, a little bit younger. I had never heard any of the Dudas kind of, it was always the 7 forward. And when he explained it to me like that, I was like, holy shit, that makes sense. That really makes sense.
It does make sense in an aspect because in the language, there's another part of it why it might be interpreted as linear. Because the phrasing gets interpreted as the face is yet born.
Right.
And I feel most people say, oh, well, that just linearly from this point forward. But the individuals that I've talked to in the Confederacy said, no, it's really about having that right to know and that responsibility. Whereas, we're so used to, well, that's my right, don't tread on it.
Right.
Like, no, well, what's the responsibility? And, as a historian, there's a lot of responsibility to ensure that you're filtering things in a proper way that can be respected and understood and also validated. Have someone else go through the same process. Call me out if I made a mistake. That's
Right.
cool. That's
Sure.
having a dialogue, having a conversation. And don't just dismiss me right off the bat. And
I mean, that's academia too, right?
yeah,
I mean,
and
that's-
academia used to be more cutthroat.
Yeah.
It's gotten better, but I don't know what directions might be in the near future. But again,
Right.
hey, we'll come to it when we come to it. The river of life. What can I say?
So I was thinking about this too. So you earlier, I mean, it kind of seemed to me you were talking about things that we've lost recently. I kind of maybe got the sense that you were talking about Indian time, possibly.
Yeah. So as a shameless plug for myself, I am intending to do my PhD history on the community's history in the mid to later 20th century.
Okay.
I want to start it just like premise, so like within my great grandparents' generation, which would cover the entire most of the 20th century. And I feel like that transition of journalism that we have in the community that has kind of faded. I wouldn't say it's gone, it just
Right.
faded. Is there's a lot that has a global impact on a lot of people that we don't have a really concise collection of what has happened, and also like Indian times history and role in the community, and having a very stable, fairly stable record of what has happened. And I would love to go through the back issues, and luckily New York State has majority of the back issues online.
Well, I also think I can probably help you out.
Yeah,
with that.
and so like the newer ones, and that's where I wanted to have that conversation of also shameless plug. I'm working with the cultural center and also on the library board.
Yep.
We would want to have that available for everyone and not just a researcher. I would love to have like all the newer editions immortalized in some capacity.
Well, because with the paper closing, and I don't know if you saw Jorge's story at CBC. He did a great job, but it was because I'm writing something about it more from a personal, more from a personal aspect, but I think it'll be pretty good. But so a reporter mentioned to me, and he was talking about Josh and I, and he said, with the paper closing, you two are you need to kind of be that, as best you can, to keep informing the community of things that are going on. And I agree. But as you were speaking about, being a historian, the way you were explaining it almost made it, you're investigating. I mean, you're investigating, you're analyzing, and then you're giving back a story to everybody, based on, it's your interpretations, but you're analyzing who were the sources, were they primary, secondary, who was the intended audience, all of that. That really made me think of you're like a reporter. Yeah. On history, but you're a reporter.
They go hand in hand.
So I could see kind of the, a similar way of doing a job.
Yeah, and it goes hand in hand. And if you look at the Western sense, the muse of history, she just recounts past deeds.
Right.
Which isn't too far off from what is journalism. Is
sure.
Recounting what the past deeds are, usually more recent.
Yeah.
And like journalism and historians have gone hand in hand, because there's a record that is being made, and then there's a record keeper who's trying to ensure it has a much longer lasting than just what's the news for today.
Right.
And both are responsible for ensuring certain voices reach certain audiences. And historians generally deal in the realm of a lot of people who've passed.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to give voice to those who no longer have a voice. And journalists strive to give voices to anybody who may not have a voice or need to amplify their voices.
Yeah, I'm the bozo with the 24-hour news cycle. You're the guy with the 2400-year cycle.
Yeah, so it's a lot of info to filter through.
Yeah.
But both, and I think that's where like there's a hand in hand with that the professionalism. I was just saying, hey, I know that you're dealing with current issues, and after you publish it, then I will work with it, and maybe be able to construct similar thoughts and ideas. And just journalism usually doesn't take historians very well in the long term, because it usually ends up being like,
you pick us apart.
Yeah, you start picking it apart and be like, I am humble enough to say at that time I understand what you know and what you don't know. Later on we can have that discussion.
When you start, the first time you really pick one of mine apart, that's it. You're banished from this show. No, but I mean, I could take it. You know what I mean?
I'm gonna have to take back that post. Take back that post.
Yeah. I'll be like, God damn, Philip. Yeah.
You could pick me apart whenever you want. I'm fuzzy. Well, my knowledge is fuzzy.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think when it comes, like, the perspective of a journalist, though, if they're doing their due diligence properly, you really do look at it like, this was accurate. You know what I mean? Like, this is what I knew, and things can come out after which change the story, and people may look back on you as like, well, you fucked up. But it's like, well, that really was, this witness wasn't there before, and he never came forward until, years after.
Yeah.
There's no way for there's no way for that reporter to have known that, you know, like that's where a historian could come in and say, well, wait a minute, you know, Al fucking Bundy, who was reporting that day, you know, he didn't have access to this, you know, firsthand witness that came forward 25 years later. You know, that's where I think like historians can also help to rehabilitate like I kind of look at it like historians, I guess, could even help rehabilitate people's image historical who perhaps maybe were wrongly maligned, you know what I mean? Based on, you know, like people saying, well, they didn't have this information. So how could you judge them so harshly?
Mm-hmm. And really understanding that, like that's one of the humbling things when we're dealing with history is like you got to constantly be reminded of like, you might say, oh, well, that amputation led to that person's death. Well, up until the 80s, we really didn't know how to manage what ailment they were going through. So that was the best at that time.
Cut it off.
Or other exploratory medicine before you could put a person through an MRI. So like you it was best guesses.
Sure.
And I think like looking at it from that perspective and looking at it like within history and journalism, like you were working with the best tools you had at that time. And when people start saying, well, people did this and people did that at that time, I was like, yes, everybody was choosing what they felt was best at that time. They found their niche. And
It's our word of the day.
That is.
yes.
I'm going to call this episode that.
I think so. It's a good way to end.
I don't want to end.
I don't want to either, but I know.
I have questions. Not questions, but because we were talking about, you know, witnessing the beauty of the Guyana Lagoa in action and our empathy. And, you know, that's a great idea. Let's do it.
But we both
Fuck.
are very realist and understand what.
Yeah. You're going up against elective councils who didn't even bother having a referendum because they don't care what their people think, apparently. And, you know, a longhouse that's got some broken tires or something going on there.
Well,
People are unhappy. I've been to meetings.
I have too.
It's bringing together. It's old factions are coming back together. The ghost of 1990 is getting buried or something.
Yeah, when I hear about the people attending these meetings, I'm like, holy, you know, like that's actually pretty good, I think.
There's a shift happening.
Yeah.
What is this shift? And
Yeah,
I think,
what's the common thing that's gathering all these formerly really contentious factions? You know, like some of the elected councils are a major reason for that.
Because I agree with you with the rigidity and the dogmatic. Like I'm with you on that. And our friends from Six Nations said one of the reasons why we're not doing our whole system is because some of our people insist on being a follower of the code, whether or not you agree with it, and then they have a real problem with that. And you know,
yeah, and like I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist. Like there's ways to look at it, and you know, people can call me out for being a hypocrite for certain things. I'm like, that's fine. I'm living.
yeah.
I am going about things in a certain way that I find will be, you know, good for me, useful for others, hopefully, and being able to do that. And I feel like that's kind of like the unsaid beauty of the Guyana Goa is like it's flexible.
Yeah.
It can shift. It can change. As long as we all agree,
Right.
it's A-okay in the long term.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where people forget about, like, it was never made to be rigid. Like the tree itself has to move with
A rigid tree cracks.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
breaks, it snaps. And so like
As soon as it gets to be
move.
about 10 degrees, that sucker's going down.
We use steel, not iron, because steel flexes.
I don't understand. Like, where did that come from? Where did that
church.
rigidity?
Well, not just there, but like the strong social understanding that has happened through the 20th century, which is like, oh, you do this, this happens. And I've like it filtered through multiple things. That's why I want to focus on the 20th century of our community. Is like, why did people make these decisions at this time? Well, one point is they did the best that they can with the information they had. Two, they felt it was an option that was probably the least invasive for them. While how that them is interpreted as them individually, their family, or their faction, or their side of the community varies. And that's where, I have to be humble enough to say sometimes we'll be able to find an answer, and many times we will not be able to find that answer. And the best I can do with what is that I can filter through. And I think that's where, with the things that are happening in community, I feel like it's certain things are reaping what they sowed, understanding that they did not sow enough, and really, what has been productive in understanding our past, our current identity, our past identity, and then also some people are really active as to how we're going to be changing our future identity. I'm like,
yeah, we get to decide. Like the old,
That's
we will be the elders.
yes.
Some of us sooner than others.
I was reminded of that quite a few times. Is eventually.
Probably if our lifestyles don't kill us first.
Well, that's what I was told. It was basically, look, you're young and you don't like the way this is going on, but eventually we're all gonna, like, it was an older person. They said we're gonna be dead, and you guys are gonna get your shot eventually. But it's kind of it was a dark joke.
yeah, got a little humor. That's like our bread and butter.
You have to have it.
I didn't realize that until I started doing comedy in Ottawa. Like, oh, we go dark
Yeah.
in a way that
is a downer for anybody who's not in the know.
That was exactly why I said it was a joke, because we do have non-native listeners.
a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot. And I know that they would hear me say that and be like, what the fuck? But that's our sense of humor.
Yeah, and that's just a survival technique. And how many apocalypses did we survive through? And I think that's like really looking at it.
More than the Japanese did. Theirs was pretty bad though.
They went through many things as well.
Every goddamn episode, you get me once.
So that's why, like, looking at whatever happens historically is like, by tomorrow this will be history.
Yeah.
And I'll be able to say, hey, I have firsthand account of what happened here. And hopefully I can submit it to people in the future who will then be able to use it to make hopefully better decisions than whatever we end up settling on. And again, same thing that our ancestors were hoping for us. And I'm just going to say that if our biggest worries are the opposite of the issues that they had to deal with, I feel like we've come a long way.
Yeah, this isn't the worst time we've been in.
Exactly.
It's
It's like, this will also pass. Something will happen in one way or another, and hopefully we have people who can record it and people who can analyze and be critical and
put on their
have
podcast
these conversations. And if it doesn't fit for one, then hopefully it grows into another. And as you were saying, that ideally this is gonna hopefully grow.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Soon
It's
we'll
working
have dozens
a
of
little,
listeners.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I blend our feeds, by the way. It
Yeah.
does make it harder to find, but one feed has a burgeoning audience and the other has 4. So.
And that's what I think is because we started, I think that because we started with the Outlaws, I think like growth there is also being helped by this show, you know what I mean? Like, and it also helped us get
it's a
people
network
watching
now.
our show.
It's a network now.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a network. The Outlaws have a network now.
Well, technically, when you had more than 2 people, it became a network.
Yeah. Became a community. And communities.
Well, a network of shows.
Yeah.
There we go.
Wait, do it again.
We're gonna be CBS soon, buddy.
We'll have more viewers. They don't have a lot anymore.
Well, fuck, man. Holy fuck.
I saw somewhere that like CNN has something like 100,000 viewers.
There was a primetime show. It was a weekend show, but it literally had like 30-something thousand fucking viewers. That was wild to me.
Well, if you start going into the foreign market, I guess apparently here Red Note's a thing.
I talked about that on the news today. That's interesting. What?
Hey, if we could get 30,000 views here.
Hey, if the Chinese will help us.
I think you're thinking small. Add a couple of zeros.
Yeah.
No. I'm saying if we could get 30,000, like I'd be like, holy shit, we're fucking famous everywhere.
That would be cool. If they each gave us $1.
Yeah. That's the Josh and I talk about this all the time. It's like that's the dream, to do this, and we're we're starting work on a story that's developing in the community. Can't really talk about it right now yet because I don't know much, but I'll tell you after. You probably already know. But that'll be our first print story on Sage's website. So we are doing a written, actual like straight news component too for
That means
the
I need to
podcast.
finish the website. Shit.
I don't think they're.
All these technical platforms.
Well, it's going to take me a little bit to. I mean, working 12-hour night shifts, it's going to take me a little bit to do the story anyway. So you got a couple weeks.
Okay.
I've been going through the back issues of Onkwehonwe Notes, and it's hilarious where they start with monthly editions,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
they change over to like late season, early seasons, and just be like, yeah, they had a hard time trying to just keep on a regular
Yeah.
basis, so
It's-
they went with something that's flexible.
I mean, like what happened with Indian time? I got arrested in May? And then, I mean, obviously, like I couldn't fucking write about it, whatever, or even talk about it here. And I published the story in December. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and then Indian time, it was like, it was just do a story when you can because you're not getting paid. You have to go do another job. You know what I mean? It's tough to be able to act. And that's the thing is like, I don't think the community realizes, even if they didn't read the paper, I don't think that they're fully cognizant yet of the full scope of that loss. You know what I mean? It's going to take a little bit, but it'll be known eventually.
Yeah, don't believe me. I started tearing up when I started seeing the early signs.
Yeah, it
Because
was.
I knew what that would mean.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All right. Well, we're Sage Against the Machine, reminding you that everything's always in flux and everything is impermanent. So
Yeah.
say something cool.
I don't have anything cool to say. You're the one who's supposed to come up with all this. Like,
Eventually, we'll make it to Nirvana in one form or another,
That's right.
there we go.
That's
and then
right.
eventually our niche.
Yes, our niche.
All right.
All right. Well, see, thanks a lot, man.
Anna.
Anna.